Hey guys, in this video I'm going to be breaking down the third track of my EP Tines. This track is called Constellations, and yeah, let's start off with the intro. This is what it sounds like. So one of the first things playing here is actually this hat sample, and this gradually fades in over the first 8 bars. This has a bit of frequency automation on it here, and then here. And without the grain delay, it sounds like this. So in this case, I've used the pitch control here in the grain delay to sort of pitch it up and make it easier to mix. The second thing in this percussion section here is some cave water Foley sounds that I've recorded myself. These have a frequency shifter on them as well as a very strong erosion, and that's what's giving it this sort of texture. Without the erosion, it sounds like this. In this section here, I've just chopped it up. Then I have this sample, which sounds like this. This is a reversed and warped version of a grain delay sample I made myself just from a sound design session a couple of years back. This is what the original sounds like. Next we have kind of a kick snare lead in, these drums. This kick sample just has a drum bus on it, and I'm using the damp feature to kind of act like a low pass. And the clap is just one layer of multiple ones that play later. And this layer also has the damp feature on the drum bus, as well as some gain and width automation. I'm using an EQ just to kind of lower the highs, because I don't need it in the intro section, and during the drop there are other layers that accomplish that. Then I have this chord sound which sounds like this. So this sound actually has a lot of processing on it, and the raw file sounds like this. And this is a sample of this chord patch, but before I put all the effects on it. So just with the sample, I have quite an intense effects chain. So there's a bit of dynamic tube, not making much of a difference, maybe making it a little bit more crunchy. Then I have an erosion. After that, a frequency shifter with a bit of automation here, for example. And this grain delay is one of the most important parts. I'm using the same trick where I turn the pitch up to an octave high and then use kind of a low frequency. In this case, I've automated the frequency to control the beating. After that are resonators, which only comes in later. A filter to filter it out the end. A delay, which only comes in here. In this case, I'm using the repitch mode on the delay to kind of introduce some pitching effects. And a low pass as well, which is just here in the beginning. After that, just some general EQ. The sample itself didn't have many highs, so I boosted them pretty intensely with a high shelf, and just some multiband compression, controlling the mids and the highs as well. Another important part is that in the file itself, I have it warped in tones mode, and I'm doing some clip transposition automation for this section and for this bit as well, which is how I get those pitching effects there. Then I have this blip sound, which just sounds like this. This is actually the same patch as I used in Sar and Slate, as well as the 4th track Tines. And this was just kind of to make the sound palette between the songs a little more similar and keep some themes present in all of the songs, as opposed to having them all just be completely separate. Then I have this sound here. This is a render of this patch, which I'll go over later. And at this point I just have a reverb, which turns on to 100% here, and then fades out. Then I have these synth resample sounds, and they sound like this. And this is a render of a chord from this synth patch. I don't have the MIDI for the chord, for the exact chord, unfortunately, but this is just a render, and then I've reversed it here and panned it as well a little bit. There's no extra processing because the patch itself already has all the EQing and stuff that it needs. The last thing here is this bass sound. This is just an 808 sample, and I've put a bit of noise erosion on it, a little bit of distortion, which I'm automating just later on here, for example. Automating up the bass so that it affects more of the higher frequencies. And I've just manually pitched these around instead of using a sample sound or having put it in a sampler. Originally I was going to go for this sound, but I preferred the way I could mix this 808 in. So yeah, that being said, let's go into the first drop. The first thing to talk about here, which has changed, is the snare, or the clap with its layers. That now sounds like this. So I have this layer on top, which I've high-passed and boosted the highs on to kind of compensate for this one, which was a bit more muffled. And I'm controlling how long the tail is on this one. And then this layer as well. And together they sound like this. Then in the percussion, I have this sound. This is also a snare sound, but it has a delay on it, as well as a resonator tuned to the key, or tuned to the fifth actually of the key, and then I'm frequency shifting that afterwards. Then I have this sample. I'm automating the pan for each hit, and I'm just high passing it there. It happens here as well. After that, this one. This is a water drip sound, which I have chopped up and ring modulated. Then I have this sound, which is just the sound of a knife scraping, and in this case I have a bit of a flanger on it, a high pass on the EQ, and a resonator, again tuned to the fifth, which isn't doing that much, to be honest. Then I have this sound. This one is being high pass, but more importantly, I have this echo where I've automated the delay time at the start of the next bar so that the delay pitches down. Then I have this one, which is actually the sound of my friend's dog barking, but kind of denoised a little bit. And I just have that in there. Then I have these hats. These have a grain delay on, and I'm automating the frequency around here every 8 bars. Then I have a filter, which I'm only using later on, and I'm just boosting the gain up with a utility for some reason. The resonator is also only turned on later. These hats come back in again. Then I have a recording of me playing a bongo cajon. This is shifted up a little bit. Then a ride cymbal. And this sound. which is from a drum break, just fades in. And overall, the drums and percussion sound like this together. And then here. Then I have the same bass playing here, just the 808 sample pitched, except I also have this operator patch, which is just a regular sine compression bass. So it's a sine wave and operator. Then I'm adding some noise using erosion, and then it's just essentially a combination of notch filtering, saturating a bit more with an amp, notch filtering again, saturating, and then some more filtering the lows and highs. Then I have this synth resample again. Unfortunately for these samples, when I was time stretching out the reverse hit, I forgot to switch it from beats mode, which is why you can hear kind of the weird changes in volume. For those of you who have beats mode as their default warp mode, remember to change it to something like complex if you're time stretching out a tonal sample like this, since this will mean that you don't have any volume changes in the fade in. That's a lot cleaner than this. Then I have the main chord patch, and this chord patch has been frozen out, so I'll go over the main MIDI first, and then I'll go over the processing on it after that. So this is a Serum patch. This is actually a modified version of the pad from Darkmind, which I've saved as a preset. Without this processing, it sounds like this. This is just two waveforms. This first one is kind of a modified square wave with a bit of noise. I used the noise feature here in the Serum wavetable editor, which you can kind of use to control how noisy a wavetable gets. And then this one, which is 3 sine waves plus a couple harmonics. And this one here is an octave down. They both have unison on. It's not detuned that much, but it's detuned a little bit. And then there's this LFO, which is controlling the level of the two oscillators, as well as the pulse width modulation and the cutoff. And in the matrix here, I've set macro 1 to be an auxiliary source so that I can use it to control the amount of modulation that the LFO1 creates. That's useful because in this second half, the chord becomes rhythmic, but I only wanted it to turn on for the second half, so that's how you'd achieve that effect. In the effects, I just have a bit of hyper. I'm not using the dimension in this case, so it's just a bit more detune, and that sounds like this. After that, I have an auto filter just to use a low pass at the end, then some erosion. Again, adding those inharmonic frequencies in. Then I have a bit of tube distortion, some high pass, a utility for panning later on, and just a span to kind of check what I'm doing and check the frequencies. So I've resampled that here. And so the very first effect in the chain is an OTT. Then I have this Fab Filter Pro MB, which helps to control the highs. This is only turning on later here in this section. In this section, it's just compressing them a little bit and then boosting them. After that, I have an auto filter again, just for this low pass here. I have one for a high pass as well. I have a utility again for balancing. And then I have this chain, which was just some mid-side EQing to make it easier to mix. Next up, I have this sound, which again is a Serum patch, which I've frozen and put some more effects on. The original Serum patch just sounds like this. So I'll unfreeze that and go over that quickly. This is what the Serum patch sounds like without any effects. And this is actually a default preset, which I've modified a little bit. So this is a wavetable which morphs between a triangle wave and a square wave, and then this other one, which is just a bunch of harmonics. I'm not sure how it was made. They both have very little detune on. And there's a low pass controlling them, and also the sub oscillator is set to this kind of more rounded sine, or well, I guess technically less rounded sine, since a sine is like the most rounded a waveform can be. But this just has a couple more harmonics, and that's also turning on. So this is what oscillator A sounds like. I'll turn off all the effects as well. This is it with the sub-oscillator. And with oscillator B. Oscillator B is actually set to a fixed pitch, and that's controlled using the octave and semitone settings. So that's why it's on +4 semitones, is because no matter which note oscillator A is playing, oscillator B will always be playing an E. And so oscillator B alone sounds like this. Then in the effects section I have some hyperdimension, a flanger, a phaser, a chorus, a reverb, some distortion, and some compression. After that I have this grain delay sound. This is, again, providing the sort of texture with the pitch automation and the frequency. And I've automated that on for this section. Then I have some erosion. I have resonators. And some reverb. Then I have rendered this out. I've just put some EQ on it, so making sure that the fifth isn't as resonant, taking out a little bit around 1K, and then just boosting around 3 kHz a little bit. I have a compressor on for this section, which isn't doing very much, just taming the peaks here a little bit, and a reverb. The reverb only turns on later. It's actually the reverb send here, which I've automated on fully for this kind of strummed, if you will, this strummed chord. Then the last thing in the drop is just this sound. This is white noise with these effects on, and I'll turn them off. This is what it sounds like without any effects. It's just white noise which has been panned binaurally around the head. And then I have a resonator and an erosion. And this is just playing very quietly in the background. After this section, I have just a short 4-bar break section, and then straight into drop 2. This is what it sounds like. So for this break section, there's just a reverse snare. And then there's these sounds. This is what the original sounds like. So I've stretched this out on beats mode, synced it to the tempo, made a kind of different rhythm, and it's being ring modulated up. After that, just a high pass, some panning automation and some gain automation. I have this ride cymbal again, and these are sort of the main sounds, so they sound like this. These are again sound design sessions, which I made using grain delay. I just put some random percussion sounds in it, mapped all of the controls in grain delay to knobs on my keyboard, and recorded this out. No real rhyme or reason until I get to this bit, where I've just synced it to tempo. Then I have the bass, which fades out fully and then comes back in. I have this sound, which I went over before, and then this chord fades in as well. So this has kind of a similar effects chain to the other resample. Again, this is the same thing. I've just taken out a chord from this patch and stretched it out really far. As you can see, the BPM is set to 912. So I've just brought this on complex mode. This is what it sounds like without the time stretching. It's just that sample, and I've stretched out really far. So the first thing in this effects chain, I'll turn all the effects off. The first thing is just some OTT, then some grain delay, and that's being automated on every bar. That kind of creates that pitching effect because it's set to minus an octave, so an octave down. Then I have this low pass automation. Here as well. And then I'm using a delay again to repitch it. And here. Some EQ. Just taking out the lows because it's quite a low heavy sound. A utility doing nothing, and some more EQ, in this case some mid-side EQ, taking out the sides a little bit. There's also a chop here, just to fit the rhythm. Then I have this instrument rack, and again I've frozen it and put some more effects on it, so this is what it sounds like without these extra effects on it. So I'll unfreeze this. This is, originally it's a instrument rack with 2 parallel chains, so it's this sample. This is a freeze file of another patch in the song. Which is this one here. And I've just taken one of the hits here, taken away kind of the start because it's kind of a delayed hit. This just has some high passing on it. Then, as the main base of the sound, I have this saw, which is not really a saw. It's this, it's a saw wave here in our operator, but then this is being FM'd by a sine wave, and this one's an octave down. And then it's this triangle wave, which is an octave and a fifth up, and this is also being FM'd by a sine wave. And this has a bit of pedal on it. After that, these two are being glue compressed together. Might be at its loudest here. Okay, this is barely doing anything. Just raising the gain a little bit. Then I have a saturator, a utility, which I'm using for balance automation, all around the patch, a Ubic A reverb, an EQ, high passing it again, and some more EQ, high passing it again, and I've got a high shelf and a couple other EQ filters. So then I rendered this out, and the most important part is the kind of manual edits I've made. And here. And then chopping off the reverb tails, and it kind of syncs with the chord. So then the first effect in this chain which I've added is an OTT again. Then I have this parallel chain which might look confusing at first, but it's actually not that complicated. It's just essentially a tuned set of resonators, and I'm automating on the the gain. So by having a utility in front of each of these chains, I can essentially automate the send volume to each one of these resonators. And so I have all the notes in the scale. We're in E minor. I have a dry chain, a highs chain, and this grain delay. automation chain as well as just a regular delay. So the first thing is this dry chain, I'll go over that. So in this dry chain I have a Ubik G grains and pitch. This is kind of similar to the grain delay in Ableton. I'm automating this on. If I leave this on all the way, that's what it sounds like, and I'm just turning it on in places. Not really too much on the actual transients of the hits because it generates quite a lot of high frequencies, but around there. And then just a kilohertz transient shaper, kind of getting rid of the transients since they get emphasized by the Ubik G. Then I have this highs chain. It would help if I muted the other sound. This is just the highs, so this is a cut at 1.5 kilohertz. Then I have an amp on it and transient shaper. This one has the attack up because it's compensating for the lack of transient in this section. Then I have this Ubik throw, which is only relevant when this utility turns up, so by setting the Ubik G to a longer grain size as well as some iteration, I can essentially use it as a grain, like a proper grain delay, where the delay times are audible. And so mixed in with the dry signal, for example, this sounds like this. It's not very audible, but it does make a difference. Then I have all of these resonators, so I'll give a couple of examples of just the chain itself, and then I'll play it with them and without them. That's one. This is for F sharp. This one's for G. This is for A. And overall, just by having different ones for every note in the scale, it's a good way to emphasize particular notes by matching up the resonator to the note instead of having to automate the note as well as the gain every single time. Especially because it means that you can have it in parallel, which you couldn't do if you only had one resonator and you were automating the note it resonates on as well. The last thing in the effects chain is just this delay, and this is only coming on a couple of times. So here, and this is a longer, more traditional feedback chain. So overall, this effects chain makes it sound like this. Then I have some EQ, which is high passing it, and some multiband compression, or dynamic EQ, controlling the highs. I have a pretty fast attack just so it responds better to the transients. And then the last thing here is just another utility turning on here. I then have this guitar mute sample, which is layering with the melody at some points. This is from a stock Ableton pack, and I have some OTT on it, and I'm splitting it into lows and highs. So the lows sound like this. This just has a little bit of run-sided distortion and some vocoding. This is what it sounds like without the vocoding. This is with. Just helps to kind of flatten out the sound a little bit, because I find that using this as an EQ when you have the modulator and the carrier as the same is very helpful. And then I have this highs rack. So this is a snap heap with a pitch shifter, it's the most obvious thing, and a bit crush and comb filter. And after that, just some phase distortion. This is what it sounds like without these three. Bit crush. I'm using the DAC quality, I'm turning it up so that there's not much aliasing. Then I have the comb filter on and the phase distortion. A bit of Ubik A reverb and some EQ as well, just emphasizing the highs in this case. The last thing I have here is this sample. This is a frozen rendered out version of this instrument patch, and then the sample itself here is pitched up an octave, and that gives it a different texture. it's on beats mode in this case, which I probably shouldn't have done. I should have picked tones or something similar. I also have some other effects in this section, like this one. In this case, I'm automating the grain delay on, which I can use to change the pitch. So since it's pitching it down an octave, the higher the wet amount of the grain delay, the lower in pitch it sounds. And I have this sound as well. The original sounds like this. So I've pitched this up 21 semitones. Then I have a resonator and an erosion on sine mode. I also have this sound. Again, a resonator. And some downsampling in soft mode. This kind of motif, which mainly happens in the break, actually also comes in the second drop. But I'm just fading it in here. And chopping it up here, just so it matches the rhythm I've made with the chords and the other plug. This synth also comes in at the end. Without the effects, the synth sounds like this. It's just one of the default wavetables, and I'm automating the wavetable position as well as the level. I have a sample and hold filter, and then there's a bit of hyperdimension, some tube distortion, some reverb, and a little bit of compression. After that, some saturation, some glue compression, which is also clipping it a little bit, a filter just for low passing in places, and high passing the sides. For the second drop, the bass is the same. I do have this neuro bass again, the sine compression one. And for the percussion and the drums, it sounds like this. So the kick and snare, or kick and clap, are mostly the same. I have this percussion, just the end of it. I have this hat sound, the same ones before. I have this one, which is different. This is just a loop. I believe it's from the Tines project. I think I used the same percussion loop for kind of continuity between the tracks, but this is very quiet anyway. Then I have this hat sound. I don't know if you can actually call it a hat. This is a sample of the same bongo cajon as before. But I took a recording of it and then in Edison used the scrub tool, this one here, the scrub wheel, with which you can manually control the pitch of whatever sample's loaded in. So I took one of the loops and manually controlled the pitch of it. Then I have this hat sample, which is actually the sound of me messing around with some ice on a chest in my dad's garden when it had snowed and there was some ice that formed on it. In this case, I've just looped it. I have a high pass on it and some frequency shifting just down here. Then I have this sound. This is just some percussion samples, chopped, vocoded, and with a bit of reverb on. I've automated the amount of late reverb, not the early level, but only the amount of late reverb, and also the formant shift on the vocoder. There's a little bit of a difference there. I have these cave water samples again. And then just at the end, these samples. Then we get into this break section, and the break section sounds like this. So I have the kick playing here. Then I have this sample. This is actually a fade in for the bit in the third drop, but this is a ride sample, a hi-hat sample, and a snare sample taken from a drum kit, which is just a default Ableton one. I have a bit of grain delay on it. Only set to 40% dry wet, some overdrive, a little bit of reverb, a low pass, and some custom wave shaping with the Ableton saturator. Then I have these Foley samples again, chopped up. Just playing this rhythm. There's a low pass on the group, on the Foley group, which is slowly going down. So it sounds like that. And then at the end it sounds like this. I have this sample just fading out. This sound again. Then I have this serum patch. This one I've just faded in, so rendered out again. At this point it's the reverb, which is making everything delayed. And then I have a send to an echo, which is on half notes, and this gets louder too. So if I just play this section. I also have this chord sound again. This time it's playing kind of differently. So I've manually, over the course of the clip, automated the low pass auto filter here, and it's just been rendered out. In these sections here, I'm using it to manually kind of work as an envelope, so making a kind of decay shape. Like that, and then I've just rendered that out. Again, I have this chord resampled, same one from the intro. This just has a lot of frequency shifting in the beginning, all the way up at 500 Hz. The grain delay slowly gains frequency, making it less harmonic, but it also lowers in terms of wetness. There's also a high pass filter, just coming down slowly. I have this chord again. This just slowly fades out and gets low passed. Then for the third drop, I'll play it, it sounds like this. So the kick and clap are the same, just that I only have the tail longer on this one and nowhere else. I have these snares, which actually is also like, I guess, a ride in a hat. Then I have this percussion sound, again the bop, This one here, very quiet. And this is just warped to beats mode again, just time stretched it out so it fits the track. I have these two hat samples again, they sound like this. I have the ride sample again. And that's it for the percussion until we get to this end bit, but I'll explain that when I get to the outro. I have a different sub this time as the main one, so this is again a modified preset. It's a sine wave with a bit of bend plus on it. This one is just a waveform from the analog section, and there's a sub with a sine wave and a couple more harmonics. This filter isn't actually doing anything, the mix is all the way down. And then in the effects section there's just an add bass filter, which I'm not actually sure what it does, but I guess it works, and a distortion as well. In the effects section, I have an analog clip saturator with the bass down, a sine fold saturator also with the bass down, a little bit of erosion which is automated in near the end. Also the gain goes down as the erosion gets louder. Then I just have a spectrum to see kind of the build up of the sound. I'm also using the sine compression bass here. Then I have these synth sounds. And here. In this section it's layering with the snares. So I just have the grain delay being automated as well as the overdrive, and I've layered it with this sound. After that I have the chords. So like I mentioned before, I'm using the auto filter from this one. I've rendered this out to create the main kind of envelope shape, and it's routed to the echo send for this section, which is why there's the delay on it. In this section, I have the filter come all the way up, and I'm just relying on the LFO in the serum patch. Again, macro one is all the way up, and that's doing the triplet movement here. Then I have this sound. This is somewhat similar in terms of its build up to this one. So again, I'll unfreeze this one, play it without effects first, and then go through all the effects. So this is that same patch as before, just with some different effects on it. I'm also using the velocity mapping, so this velocity is controlling a lot of things like the amount of modulation on the cutoff, the detune, the volumes of all the oscillators. And so that's helpful when I want to have this kind of pedal below, but I don't want it to be too harsh because I still want the main melody to stand out. And so first in the effects chain is a compressor. I'm using makeup gain in this case, again compensating for this section. Grain delay. Same trick, so low frequency, octave up on the pitch. Erosion set to 100. This automation is doing nothing, I'm not sure why I have it. Then I have a resonator set to the root note E and then the fifth, an octave up, as well as just the regular fifth. Some reverb. saturator, high pass, this delay, so you can hear that there in the background. And here. And I'm just automating the delay time, turning down the feedback as well. Then I have this auto filter, which is low passing it at the end. At the end, the resonators also go up to 100%. Then I rendered this thing out, and with the render, it sounds like this. This just has a little bit of OTT, some dynamic EQ on the highs, and again some mid-side EQ. In this third drop I also have the chords, but those fade out. There. At this point the resonator is a lot louder, same with here in the break. Which is how you get it to sound so different to before. The last thing in this section is again the noise, which just comes in all the main sections. And then just for the outro here, I have this sample again, this time set to triplets. I have this one, again triplets. I have this Foley. So this time it's a lot more carefully chopped up than before. I've made a little percussion loop out of it. I have the bass, which fades out. The chords, which also fade out. And this one. The very last thing here is the first piano chord for Tines, which I have frozen, reversed, and faded in with a bandpass EQ and a bit of erosion and a bit of reverb. So yeah, that's the third track off my EP. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.